I'm here with Arian Price. Yay. Roan's mom on, yay. Let's clap our hands like old school stuff.
Yay! I'm so
On
happy to be.
the 16th of December, 2023. Roan's done 2 interviews so far. Arian, I started working with you. It's hard to believe it's been less than a year so far. You and Steve engaged me in. I've known you as a friend for only a few years, but I've known you as a member of the Groundlings for something. So your
After, huh?
main company, you were an alumni of the main company of the Groundlings. So,
I am an alumni of the famed, some people say, I didn't say it, they say it, Groundlings Comedy Theater here in Hollywood, where we do sketch comedy and improv. It's a breeding ground for Saturday Night Live people, Kristen Wiig, Maya Rudolph, Will Ferrell, and people like me also who are super passionate about improv. I was in the main company for about 17 years, brought Roan with me backstage. He got to be exposed to some really cool, fun people. And actually, Dan was one of our regulars. He was often in the front row on our Thursday night improv shows. We considered him an improv intellectual, and we loved that he was there because obviously, as performers, you love to have people there that are hanging on your every word or laughing. But so I've become an alumni, but I still perform and I'm very active as an alumni. And I also create on my own outside of the theater. I have an animated project that's been optioned. I have a podcast that, as the kids say, has just dropped with two Groundlings colleagues. And I love all things funny and thoughtful and free. And I also love teaching improv skills for life. So that's where I'm at, what I'm going into. But I'm also a mom, although my son, Roan, is now 17 and he doesn't think he needs very much, although he is quite independent. And we'll get into how Dan plays into that. But he was a real attached kid. He was like my little best friend and thought I was the best thing in the world. And then, as is very normal and healthy, when he turned about 15 and a half, 16, he just wants to be with his friends and he doesn't want me around. I was hanging around a holiday party that he was throwing at our house last night. And he just gave me a look like, you get out of here. And when I went upstairs and looked at myself, I realized why. I would have been a scary witch-like mom in my robe. And yeah, it was like a character. So yeah, that's a little bit about who I am as a creator in a way.
talk a little bit about this new project that dropped.
Yeah.
Okay, and then also about a couple of the iconic films you've been in. You can mention them by name, but some of them are very big films.
Yes, I've appeared in some films and on TV. I had a tiny little part in Bridesmaids, and I had a fun part singing some crazy stuff in a pool in Barb and Go to Visit Elmar. My colleagues from the Groundlings are Kristen Wiig and Annie Mumolo, so they were very gracious to bring me into their world, and I've worked with them on stage a lot. So a lot of the magic is on stage, and you just have to be lucky enough to be there that night, which Dan was a lot. And I work primarily, of course, as an actor, we want to get parts, but one really cool thing I have happening right now is a podcast that was created out of having a development deal for a television show. The show didn't end up selling, but the podcast is now going, and it's myself and two Groundlings women, and we all play characters. And it's like a Between Two Ferns mashup with Left and Center. I play the real liberal, and we get great guests in there and we really dig in. And it's really fun playing a character on even just on a podcast. So it's called Multiple Talking Women. And yeah, you'll have to check that out. And we have men and women and all kinds of people as guests.
I can only imagine the guests that you have. And it's funny because I came to Cooking with Gas, which is the show you're referring to, literally every Thursday night, except once in a while when I get a cold, for 25 years.
Wow.
I don't think I ever missed a show. I loved it so much. And I remember you doing a show. What was the show you did about your mom?
Oh, yeah. So I did a solo show that I wrote titled Dead Moms Don't Hug, which to me is funny because that's the kind of sense of humor I have. And it's also true. But I do think the title scared some people. But I have to say, the show was me. I had found this old trunk of my mom's stuff. It was like something out of a movie when her mother passed away. And it was everything I would have wanted when I had gone through all of these kind of coming of age moments, diaries and pictures and journals and letters and everything. So the show was me putting those up against my paralleled coming of age moments, which are probably very inappropriate to talk about here. But it was a show. And I will say people probably laughed more than there was maybe a few teary-eyed moments, but it was a laugh fest.
It was a crazy show, and I think I saw it twice. Did you run it?
I
Did you
did, yeah.
I think
Yeah.
I came to see it twice, and a couple of years apart. And I was fortunate enough. I did take a lot of classes at Groundlings, although I never performed. I think I actually got pulled up on stage a couple of times when I think it was on another show where they were pulling members of the audience out. But it was never my aspiration to be an improvisational actor. I just was always of the mind, and I want to lead into something that you talked about with Improv for Life, because one of the classes I took, one of the many classes, was a class with you, which I think was Improv for Life. And as like improv is woven into the fabric of my program, right? It's one of the,
Yes.
so would you talk about improv, the class that you teach, Improv for Life, and your view on improv as an essential life skill to have, particularly when it comes to kids and adapting and all of that?
Absolutely. So yes, as corny as it sounds, I'm like very passionate about the kind of the idea that improv can help pretty much every demographic of person in every part of their life. When you do improv in front of an audience, you are creating something out of nothing with a scene partner who you have not planned anything with. So you can't say, I'm going to say this and you're going to say this and then this is going to happen. But yet you want the scene to seem like the two of you know each other and you're going in the same direction. The Groundlings has a training program. The way I look at art, because I look at improv as an art, is that let's say it was a painting class. The Groundlings teachers can give you the paintbrushes and tell you how to hold it and how to shade things or how to make a correct shape or mix colors, but it is an art. But I learned through teaching this art to actors that actually so much stuff was coming out of people that was their own psychological stuff. There were the students who always wanted to devolve into a fight in the improv. And remember, you have the world is your oyster. You're making up something out of nothing. So what I started to see was that not only were students and people bringing in their own life stuff, obviously, to build these improvised moments, but that the opposite is also true, that we can learn from the basic tenets of improvisation how to communicate better, to listen better, to have a better conversation, to have more self-confidence, to turn off the judgmental side of our brain, the ego that so many people, we all have. It keeps us alive, but it also prevents us from moving forward and being our best self. Improv can also help us recover from mistakes or perceived failures faster. So in my trainings, I have been hired to work with people from Google to Nike to Apple to Yoplait to lawyers to bankers to the cast of the television show The Doctors, which is still on because they weren't sounding very natural, to help them recover and have normal sounding conversation. Because when you're having a conversation, it's someone can throw you something and you're not planned. You need to be able to come up with an answer that reflects what they asked you and that is also something to add to it. So we've all heard the yes and is one of the major kind of building blocks of improv, but also life. You know, how often are we in a conversation where we're not really listening to the other person at all, and we're actually formulating what we're going to say back to them? So we do concrete exercises just the same way a basketball player goes and does a layup. I don't know basketball lingo, but tries to shoot baskets over and over. We do exercises that are fun, but they actually change the synapses and the connections in your brain. It's been studied, it's science. And through working with a group with improv and realizing that we're all going to, again, fail. I don't really like the word fail because it's not really failing, but finding the perfection and imperfection, that's where we get the interesting stuff. That's where we get the interesting juice. And working with your colleagues and seeing them, again, I don't like the term, but making a fool of themselves, because people don't do, if you don't do what we do, it does seem really weird to do some of these exercises. It's like being a kid again. But realizing that you're safe if you fall and that there are actually tools to get back to the next correct thing to say or the right way to respond, or even learning how to build pauses into moments where somebody might say something unkind to you in life, whether it's an in-law or a business colleague. So you'll have to take my class to actually learn all of those things that I just said. But I've seen this help and transform people who are grieving, people. I've worked with best-selling author Hope Edelman, who wrote a book called Motherless Daughters. I have worked with children who were bullied in school. I have worked with, gosh, the gamut. I recently worked with the water polo teams from UCLA, the male team and then the female team. I will say the female team was much better. The males were just like, they were real jocks and they were real freaked out. They're fine when they're treading water for an hour and throwing a ball around, but they were scared. But when you push yourself to do something like that and step outside your box, life becomes more fun, I think, and also easier. And you let go a little bit of that self-judgment.
I love so much what you said, so much of everything that you just said, and particularly the finding perfection and imperfection. And
Yeah.
as the mom of a teenager, I'm wondering how that might show up. And you've worked with a lot of kids, you've worked with a lot of teens. In fact, I think you
Yes.
teach a class for kids. I know the Groundlings does. I wonder
Yeah.
how that you can relate that back to how that might show up as you've watched Roan evolve. One of the things I love so much about working with you and Steve and Roan is that on your voicemail, you
Yeah.
still have Roan as a child saying, "May the force be with you," when he was, I don't know, 5 years old, 6 years old.
It's literally the force be with you.
Exactly. And I think he's channeling through you right now because he's got so many interests, but here he is now, this 6'3", like
Yeah.
giant, and a deep voice, but it's a big change. When did that recording get made? How old is he? 5 or something?
Probably. Roan had that funny little voice for a long time. He also did not, at his first birthday, he didn't have teeth yet. And when he was young, he was really this burly, big, strong guy. And I literally said, I think he's just going to be the strong but silent type, which of course could not be. He's strong, but he is not silent. He's incredibly well spoken. So you never know. That would be my one advice for parents is you don't know what's going to happen. But I would say the whole idea of perfection being found in imperfection, and this really relates to all of us, but especially teenagers, is it all goes back to the ego, but it goes back to like caveman day. And we have something in our brain called the amygdala, and it's there to remind us of anything that it perceived as bad or dangerous that ever happened to us ever in our lives. And the reason why that's there is because if we were cave people, living like people did in the beginning of time, and you saw somebody fall off a cliff, your amygdala would make a recording of that. It might even make that recording seem scarier than it really was, although that's pretty scary, to remind you that every single time you walk by that cliff of what happened to that person so that you don't go close and it doesn't happen to you. Human beings are now not in that situation anymore. Most of us aren't. And so our amygdala, though, is still looking for things to protect us from. But in this case, it's protecting us from things like, oh, I sounded foolish at the dinner party. Or for teenagers, it's a survival brain instinct. I don't have anyone to sit with at lunch, or I'm worried people don't think my jokes are funny, or I'm trying to find my tribe or a friend group. And being a teenager is a time to experiment with all of that because we are not cave people. We have the luxury now of getting to experiment and getting to live in this world, but our brains are still trying to protect us from perceived threats. And teenagers are especially looking around at, do I fit in, right? And we want to fit in to an extent, but where it can get dangerous for teenagers and anyone and actors and artists and business people is that when instead of just fitting in, we are becoming bland and we're camouflaged. We're not seen. And so in improv, the reason why I put quotes around mistakes, perceived mistakes or failures, is that often that's the unique stuff. You say a word that you weren't expecting to say, you make a joke that didn't hit right, but it can lead you to something else that is your own unique voice. I came up in the Groundlings with Kristen Wiig, and there was definitely a time when she was really hitting when I was like, I need to be more like her. Or another example, an even stronger one, is Mikey Day, who's now on Saturday Night Live. In the Groundlings with him, we were in this one show and he was doing all of this really incredible high concept stuff. And he's a young guy. And I was pregnant at the time doing the show. And I think I was like, gosh, this just isn't my show. It's the Mikey Day show and everybody loves his stuff. And one day I ran into somebody at the store and they said, oh, I just have to tell you, your scene was my family's favorite scene. And I realized in any audience, in any group of people, that there's going to be someone who likes your voice, but you have to be brave enough to do it. because had I tried to do a high concept young man in his 20s, Mikey Day scene, I would not have shined. I had to do what came from me that was unique as me. So it really is those things about us that make us stand out and that eventually I think lead to success, which in my book is being able to fully be yourself and to have people who accept you for yourself. But even if they don't, to have enough kind of self-love and self-acceptance to do it anyway. Obviously, don't be a jerk to people, but it's about really being a teenager by definition. It's about exerting your own uniqueness against your parents. So there are things that we do. I do have a lot in common with Roan, but he has to individuate from me and become his own person. So that might mean, even though I know he thinks what I say is funny, pretending it's not. No, but he actually is he was laughing a lot at my podcast the other day, and that was a great moment. But yeah, and my dad is actually a child psychiatrist, and he's given me a lot of these helpful hints and talked to me about how important it is for teens to individuate from their parents at a certain point, because I was pretty thrown, I have to say. He was a real mama's boy, and then it was like he just didn't care to hear what I had to say, not in a mean jerky way, but he just wasn't as interested. And I do have to say that's where having Dan in his life has now filled that piece, going back to, I don't want to say caveman days again, but to a time where people were more community oriented and there was the village, and people always talk about it taking a village. Young people would have mentors. They would have their parents, but they would also have everybody else in the group. And if your kid showed a certain proclivity for being able to do a certain task or had a certain talent, they would bond and hopefully be under the wing of a mentor, of an adult who could help usher them into that world. And it's interesting the way that Roan will get really lit up by a huge amount of things that Dan suggests or says. Just last night, apparently Roan was having a party and asked Dan if he could recommend like the best horror movie he could think of. And he certainly wasn't asking me this. So somebody that my son really respects and thinks is very cool, which is not an easy task because he's 17 and he's pretty cool, but he thinks Dan's very cool, definitely cooler than me, which is great because now he has someone who I respect and who I feel safe that the things that Dan is going to be suggesting Roan try out, the books that he might want to read, the music that he might want to listen to, taking up the piano, or even just ways of thinking about things. It gives me a huge amount of confidence, and I can take a deep breath that I don't have to be monitoring and hands-on and worried. And also to have someone other than your parents championing you and supporting you and lighting up when they see you is a really big thing. So that's just the beginning of our experience.
And thank you for the kind words. And I have to say, and we've talked about this before, that mentorship is that while I'm older and Roan is younger, there are these feedback loops. Yes. And as Roan is, and I'd like you to talk about his workshop in a second, but I've learned from Roan, which makes me a better mentor, which makes him a better mentee, and makes him in turn a better mentor for his mentee, which in turn for his mentee, who's going to go on and I think become Roan's teaching assistant, which I've suggested along the way. So there are these feedback loops. But before we get to talking about Roan's workshop and how nervous he was before he did it and how triumphant he was afterwards, the call you and Steve made to me afterwards and beaming with pride and sending me the photos, I want to talk about two things. First of all, the silence. You talk about the importance of inserting those moments of silence when it comes in improv. And we're uncomfortable with silence. Silence is a cultural thing. Having lived in Japan for a long time, they use silence very much in their communication. And you talked about silence and also the blandness that comes in a lot of people wanting to fit in. Here in the US, we're taught the early bird gets the worm and the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And that shows up a lot in improv. But I wonder what your observations are about that when it comes to, as your son, I don't say lurches, but now sprints towards the college application process, not too far away in a very competitive market. The importance of standing out, which Roan is doing in spades. But you've seen this from the beginning, that part, and then what your observations and your ahas are, and you started on this, about being a parent and the comfort and discomfort that comes with you're letting go and having somebody other than yourselves, in this case, me or another mentor, kind of not take over, but fill that gap.
Yeah, I've always been of the mind, as much as a hands-on, and believe me, I was very hands-on mom. Roan went to a preschool that was a co-op. So I had to physically be there, I think 3 mornings a week. So I could not have been more hands-on. And due to the nature of my work, which sometimes I was working and sometimes I wasn't, sometimes I was a stay-at-home mom. But I've always been of the mind, despite that, that the more people who you trust and who you respect, your child looks up to or gets care from, the better your child will end up being. Why I'm not a fan of things like the Duggar family, who are the evangelicals who have ended up having all sorts of horrible scandals. But their whole thing is everyone's totally the same. They look the same. They have 19 children. They're not allowed to be exposed to other people. They're not even allowed to go to school. And as we see evangelicals raising their angry little hands in this country more and more, we do see some people falling into that. You're not normal. What's normal? So I've been hands-on, but I've also opened my arms to Roan being influenced and taught by anybody who would want to, because what mom doesn't want to break? But as far as the term that comes to me is like letting your freak flag fly, which is a silly way of saying being yourself, because we really are all different. And in fact, I'm almost 50, and I grew up with a number of friends who I'm still in touch with, and people from high school who I see where they've ended up. And it's been quite interesting that some of the kids who were pushed by their parents to be cookie cutters of either themselves or their siblings have really burnt out and become not happy people, or people who are enjoying life or adding to the world, or letting their freak flag fly, so to speak. What that looked like for Roan was exposing him, which of course from me, I'd be singing a lot. I'd be at the Groundlings a lot. His dad would be as funny. His dad would be cooking. His dad would be doing his thing. But if Roan would express an interest in something, I would never say, no, that's not something that you should be interested in. And I know you're probably listening to this thinking, well, no parent would do that. I see it happen all the time. No, you're not going to take theater because mommy doesn't know anything about it. So you're going to play soccer instead because mommy played it, whether you want to or not. But that's a world that I feel safe in. And we have to feel safe, and we just have to do what our parents did. And Roan was always someone who wanted to try a lot. He would get frustrated if he didn't learn something right away. So letting him know that's okay. And we don't always become experts in something right away. He's naturally a great singer, so that's great. Does that mean he has to be a singer? No. Like, he has a natural talent. Great. I would love for him to use it at some point in his life or some way in his life. But I love to see when he's interested in all sorts of different things, even if they're different from his peer group.
You talked about the importance of silence and how you use that in improv. And part of what's in my program, and I just think it's an important teaching kids how to become better communicators. And that's just not on paper. Your son happens to be an incredibly strong communicator in person and on paper, and a naturally good, his emotional intelligence is off the charts. But the use of silence and the use of learning to lean in, and more importantly, listen. He's an extraordinary listener. And I think you'll agree, improv is very much about the art of listening. So I wonder if you could talk about that and its importance when it comes to teens getting ahead of the curve, becoming better listeners, and how that impacts their progress through school and potentially into college.
Yes. In improv, there's something called steamrolling, and we never want to improvise with somebody who's a steamroller. What that means is you're going to get half a word out and they're going to just steamroll ahead with their idea. But we're supposed to be creating a scene together. And if you don't listen to a person finish the very last word of their sentence, and there's actually a game we do around this, you really don't know what they're going to say. And I fault myself. I cut people off all the time. I get too excited, I get passionate, or I want to fix things. But in improv, you do have to just sit back and listen, and then you respond to exactly just that was said. For example, if I'm on stage and my scene partner says, oh, the sun is emitting the most beautiful golden light tonight. I think it's the perfect night for that picnic we've been talking about. I have many choices as how to respond to that. So what I would not want to do would be like, I don't like the sun. I want to go inside and watch Netflix and chill. because that just kills it all. We want to listen to everything, and we want to listen to the whole part of it. That golden sunset, that picnic that we've been talking about. Oh my gosh, finally. That means that it's something that we've wanted for a long time, and that I want to build on that. I want to yes and. Gold is actually striking. It seems almost otherworldly. You can build a whole scene, and we don't want to miss those pieces of information. So when your kid is talking to you, it's very easy to just jump in there and try to fix the situation and not listen to all of it. But you're cheating yourself and them, because you might not hear the whole story. For example, Roan said to me in the car today, we get our final grades on Wednesday. And my impulse was to say, as soon as I heard final grades, was to say, how do you think it's good? Life is about so many different things. Don't worry. Are you worried? Parents can spiral. Like, what was he really trying to say about that? But instead, I just let him say that. And then a moment of silence. And then I think he said, yeah, I think I did pretty well. And then I had a moment. And then I said, great. I'm a strange parent in that I'm not super pressury or pushy about grades. Ironically, Roan gets A's and A pluses, but I literally say things to him like, I want you to find people in your life who you are intellectually compatible with and can challenge you, and that you can have a great conversation with and feel joy with. Because too many people I know got straight A's, got burnt out, and it wasn't really about anything other than that. And that leads into college. In all of the research and reading and meetings and speeches and everything I've been listening to right now, the parents that are shocked that their kids didn't get in will sound like this. My kid had a 5.0. He did 20 extracurricular activities, and he's like the perfect person, but it starts to sound like they're describing a robot. So this is where imperfections becoming interesting personality traits comes in. This is where I'm glad Roan is self-motivated and wants to do well, and that's important to me. But if it's from a hammer of a parent that says good grades equals a great college, that then equals I don't know what, for me, it's more about something that Dan's talked a little bit about. Where is the place that Roan is going to thrive? Not some place that's been decided by society, which very well could be a place that Roan might thrive, is the best place. But where is Roan going to thrive? And that's something that we don't think about as a culture a lot. There's like the best. And is it the best? There's too many different bests. But as a culture, we are obsessed with I would always be shocked watching the Olympics, because somebody would win. There'd be a winner and then there'd be a loser. And the difference between them would be like 0.007 milliseconds of a millisecond. So in improv, there's a little bit of a wider breadth. There isn't a winner. And the way we want to improvise throughout life is we want to follow pathways where the story looks like it's going to be a rich story. We don't want to go to the dead ends. So we don't want to say, there's no sunset tonight. I don't know what you're talking about. Or, oh, I never wanted to have a picnic with you. And then the scene is done and the audience is okay. And then you're making work harder for yourself. You're not following the information. So how does listening come into that? It comes into hearing the whole of what somebody is saying. And it's also okay when listening to ask a question and say, I don't quite understand. That's something that I have seen some kids being told by their parents to literally someone put a hand up, don't ask questions. Asking questions is actually a huge sign of intelligence. But so that the kind of robotic era of these perfect children marching all to the beat of the same drum has come, I think, to an end. And we're seeing that people want to see who are the new thinkers, who are the new inventors, who are the new entrepreneurs, who is somebody who's thinking about things in a little bit of a different way. And those differences need to be supported when you're a kid and even adult.
Yeah, I mean, beautifully said. And I think now that we're in the week in which kids who applied early decision, restrictive early action, or early action found out the results. And there are a lot of happy kids. There's a lot of gnashing of teeth and smashing of idols. And there are a lot of kids who are like, great, that's how it was meant to be. I'm going to be happy no matter where I end up. And I think you and I and Steve and Roan have landed on the same page, which is, it's my philosophy. It's not where you go, it's how you show up where you go. You hedge your bets. It's not the right way of saying it. any school, my belief is that any school you apply to, as long as you decide early on, we'll get into the trip that you had where you started looking at schools, and you still have some other schools you're going to look at, would be so lucky to have Roan. And
Right.
to believe that many parents and kids go hat in hand to insert name of top 50 school here, saying,
Sure.
please take my X hundred thousands of dollars on the off chance that you will admit my son or daughter, or on the off chance they'll major in something where they can maybe break even and come out and not be in debt until the time they're 50. And I think that it's baked into the way that we think, because there are a lot of parents who are focused on the ROI of college, which is very often attached to the money that you'll make when you come out, as opposed to, and there's nothing wrong with that. College is a very big financial investment. My belief, and I think we share this because we talked about this, but I want to hear about this when we get into it, when you brought me on board, is that it's just the beginning, I hate to say of the journey because it's so overused, but of the journey. College is where you also get a chance to meet people who may come from your school and people who are nothing like you. And
Yeah.
like the pinballs move around in the machine, you're going to meet people who maybe take them in a completely different direction. He's got a pretty good idea about some things he is interested in studying, and other things he has no idea. And so with the idea that it's like one step along the way, this lines up with many of the things you talked about with improv. Any school would be lucky to have your kid and any other kids. And when you look at that and reframe it, because reframe is very much a part of like life in general, yes? And improv, when you reframe that as thinking of yourself as the parent and as the kid, as much the buyer as the seller in this equation, it loosens things up a lot. I also wanted to come back to what you said about not so much challenging authority, but asserting oneself, asking questions. And I wonder if you could dig a little deeper and lean into that more. I do encounter a number of, not so many kids in my tribe, but some who are told, don't ask questions. If your teacher, if the clarity of the assignment isn't there, don't ask the teacher because you might get in trouble and not get a good grade. Now, Roan doesn't display that. Talk to me more about what Roan goes to a small private school here in LA. But have you
Yeah.
seen observations along the way? Because it is very frightening to assert oneself as a kid, but it's a necessary skill.
Yes. So Rowan actually has had a really colorful history of school. He's been at both public, private, kind of elite, not huge classes. And now he's found himself at this amazing independent, smaller school. I've always been someone to ask questions in a medical setting, or of teachers, or of a place where I'm not an expert in something, right? And at a place where maybe I am an expert in something. I don't consider myself an expert in anything, but I think the wisest people have enough confidence to be able to not be seen as wise all the time. The the confidence with which to be able to answer a question probably starts way back in childhood and culturally. But as long as I've known Roan, he's always asked thoughtful questions from teachers. And trying to think of how I should put this. Roan is also, gosh, he went through a time of being the class clown and being a jokester. And he actually experienced or experimented with some time in fourth grade asking silly questions. So I think we were like brought in about that. But it was very entertaining. But no, you end up getting so much more information, obviously, when you take a deep breath and have the confidence with which to ask a question. However, it's also important to be able to answer a question by saying, I don't know. Let's figure that out together. Or I think I know someone who might know. So I've tried to model that for Roan, but I've also seen him do that with a number of the kids at school who look up to him. Roan doesn't pretend to have all the answers to anything. I'm not sure that anyone does. Being able to ask a question and being able to answer it by saying, I don't know, but let's look into that together, actually just opens up the world to an interesting conversation. So it's just, again, going back to improv, it's about keeping many pathways and many doors of possibility open instead of shutting them down and just saying no, or you're bad for not knowing that, or you're whatever. And then at Roan School, the teachers will go back and they'll explain things differently, and everybody will learn something. And Roan is not a kid who's full of himself and thinks that he knows everything. People don't love a know-it-all. So asking questions is very important. Yes.
And yeah, thank you for that. Beautifully expressed. Talk a little bit about what did you go through, and this isn't meant to fat and laud me. What brought you to the point of wanting to bring in a mentor or somebody else to help along this process? Because Roan was
Yeah.
just beginning his sophomore year. Talk about where you were. We were at the beginning of our sophomore year, and this was
Okay.
a little bit about that.
It's pretty easy for me to just almost immediately get in touch with what I was feeling. And it was just a feeling of kind of fear, out of control, powerlessness. And yeah, I would try to read everything I could about the college process, and I'd hear things, and there's all these whisperings and gossip and websites and things people are trying to sell you and this and this. So it was a combination of me feeling like this is not my area of expertise and feeling a weight on me of trying to balance, because I have a kid who really wants to go to college, trying to balance between not trying to be like, it's okay, don't worry about it, versus you got to work your ass off. Just trying to. So honestly, to have someone like Dan, who basically this is his area of knowledge and can take a lot of those questions for me, but they're not also looped into Roan, you're not eating your vegetables. He really doesn't like vegetables, or into the normal parental struggle type stuff. Now, Dan has taken some of the stuff that I don't know about and the stuff that frankly makes me scared and freak out. Or like also I get really emotional when I start to think about this. It's awful. It's great. I want Roan to go away to a great school that he loves, but also like it kills me. So that would also get into the emotional conversation with him. I remember once I said something like to Roan, like, it's fine with me if you want to go across the country, trying to sound to college, sound okay with it. And he was like, good. He said something like, yeah, I'm going to do what I want, which is ultimately what you want your kid to have, independence and to want to explore and to have the confidence with which to do that. But there's, in a nutshell, so many conversations that Roan can have with Dan, more than just conversations, deep introspective analyses and conversations that he can have with Dan. And because he's not Dan's child, Dan cares about him and wants the best for him, but he's not going to start potentially crying and worrying about all the things that I would worry about. It really, for me, it did come down to that emotional fear, sadness. And then also it's Dan. I also see Dan in some ways as a therapist. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's the amount that Roan gets to check in with him about everything that's going on. I just know that there's somebody looking out for him other than just me, because I do tend to worry. And it is hard for me. It's hard for me to use a lot of the improv for life skills, which is why it's good to teach them, because it helps to reinforce them within myself of just being in the moment, right? We want to just stay in the present moment and take one thing at a time and build. That's hard. It's hard to do as a parent. For me, I'm immediately jumped to who will his roommate be? What's going to happen? Is he going to be lonely? Is he going to be getting enough food? Is he going to get his heart broken terribly? And what's going to happen with that? Where is he going to live? It's a spiral. So Dan was like this big, solid foundation to just be like, okay, I'm going to put you here for a minute, Roan, and you can do that. And I'm not going to influence you by my spinning wheels. Instead, he can discover with Dan. And then Roan will come to me and say, I want to read this book because Dan suggested it, or I want to do this, or I've been thinking more about this. And it's just such a relief.
And to your point about the vegetables, and I want to talk about the
Yes, we
vegetables
did get into that
it's a
together.
good example. It's a small example, but it's an important example. And I wonder if you could start with talk about the vegetables, because you had a concern about nutrition. And then we did the vegetable of the week thing. But I just want to use it as an example.
Well,
And Roan's taking direction. So can you talk about the vegetable and the nutrition concern? Because it was such a cool thing. And we played it as it was almost like a game show. But
so Dan and Roan are working on all this stuff, right? And Dan, when I check in with him, will often say at the end of the conversation, if there's anything else that I should be looking out for or anything you want to let me know. And I knew he didn't mean like, how is Roan eating? But I was so frustrated because yes, my son might get A's and A pluses, but he will gag just looking at broccoli and cannot be in the same room as someone eating fish. So I said, I know you're probably not asking this, Dan, but he doesn't want to eat vegetables and it's really worrying me. And long story short, all of a sudden, Dan and Roan have this vegetable of the week thing. Partially, Roan looks up to Dan in a way of Dan is this interesting man who's lived all over and he's sophisticated. And so there was an element of, ooh, if Dan's suggesting this might make me into an interesting man. Like it's a really cool kind of inspiration. And it's so different than hearing from your mom, eat your lima beans. So we did the vegetable of the week, and we went through a bunch of vegetables. And now actually Roan has a much wider palette. And then the craziest thing happened. But Dan made it, going back real quick, Dan made it into kind of part of their, so it was like, we're just going to tackle this. And it became not a game, but almost, I could tell it was exciting to see how he was going to present to Dan what it was like. And it just took away a lot of that kind of stress. I don't want to sound, it probably sounds like I'm saying a lot of good things about my kid. He's a normal kid, and we've had lots of ups and downs and all sorts of things, but I do think he surprises me, continues to. Like, after starting working with Dan, all of a sudden Roan has decided that he doesn't want to have as 90% of the amount of sugar or fast food that he used to have. And I have to say, that's been probably one of the most, because I really personally struggle with sugar addiction, very bad. And I was always trying to tell her I didn't want Roan to end up like me, right? But so Roan has bested me, if that's the term, and has given me advice about how to go about that. So it's just been watching some growth happen with my hands off the wheel. Huge amounts of growth has happened with my hands off the wheel. Sure, I did give Roan an incredible foundation. I'm going to sneeze, but maybe not. Okay.
Was that an improvisational sneeze? I just have to
That was
ask you.
not. That was a
Was that a
very real.
stage sneeze? I could just see you and Kristen and Will and Mikey and.
That was, but if it wasn't improv, we would have wanted to have dug into that.
Okay, all right, yeah, that's because if so, it was.
It's a big one. So growth can if you give your child a solid foundation, then it's really fun to watch how they can grow when your hands are off the wheel, and when they're being influenced by someone, like in this case Dan, and to see the stuff that they do. It puts you to shame. In this case with the sugar, it put me to shame. But hey, in a great way.
Yeah, and the truth is, the vegetable of the week thing was really more. I remember I was walking up Cahuenga from doing some food shopping, and you expressed this to me, and it was a little bit of alarm because he was a fast food junkie, and it certainly wasn't that he was putting on weight or anything, but it was a concern because, and
it was not good.
I'm
It was
not a nutritionist, but it was something that had gone on, and Roan just didn't like vegetables. And your husband Steve is a gourmet chef and had wanted to make these meals for a while. And so it started with, how about if we tried peppers? He's like, I really don't like them. And I said, if you don't like them, I will gladly refund your misery. And he said, I do like Mexican food. So suppose Dad blended those in. I said, let's just give it a shot. So every week it was something. And I think there was a week in which we tried Brussels sprouts, and he said, I got to tell you, I just hated them. I'm like, great, there's a win, right? It was just, I got to say, I just really hated them. So there was a win. But what followed from that, I didn't tell him, don't eat sugar. What followed from that was just
I know.
for working out. And now he's just working out. And it mirrored something that happened very early on, because piano has been something. I also sing, I'm a musician, but I never learned to be music ever. And very early on in the process, Roan had said to me, Dan, Roan, sang because he's a musical theater guy. He had the lead in Grease. I just crushed it as Danny, and he's got another piece coming up. He said, I've always wanted to learn the piano. I've just never gotten around to it. And I had a conversation, and maybe you can talk about this with you and Steve, and said, why don't you just go in on maybe split it maybe you can talk about that. Now that and Roan was concerned, I want to be perfect with learning. Well, talk about that a little bit.
There was a certain point, I think, when it clicked with Roan, that as he was growing older, that it's not necessary, your world's going to start feeling small. If you're at a dinner table with people and you're 30 years old and you're like, I don't eat peppers and I don't eat any of this, and I've always wanted to try A, B, and C, but I never have. It was I think in some ways seeing Dan's travels and all the life he's lived, seeing what kind of man and what kind of person he wanted to grow into would require taking some chances on not being perfect at certain things and stepping outside of his comfort zone, right? Because he was a fast food junkie, and it was scary for me and awful. And my husband's a chef of all things. But I think it just clicked with Roan, who is really into all of this like interesting literature and all of these interested about all these different ways of life. Yeah, junk food's great once in a while, but did he really want to be boxed into that kind of stereotype of person, right? First, starting with learning about different kinds of vegetables, learning about how they I hate the word mouthfeel, but it's a thing. Mouthfeel is like a big thing, actually. If something has a weird mouthfeel, people won't eat it if they're sensitive to that. So learning about that you have a sensitivity to certain mushy things. And hey, that's okay. And let's try this one. And then being able to learn the piano and to be fired up and excited about that. He bought half of this really great keyboard and we bought the other half. I come from a family of amazing piano players. I only ever learned to play by ear and now I don't know how to play at all anymore. You look at these kids and you're like, the world is your oyster. You're such a fertile ground, but you don't want to pressure them. And so Roan got really interested in learning to play the piano. And I don't think that's going to be his thing, but it opened up his mind in such a way that what it led to, okay, so he might not become an amazing piano player, but he learned enough that what it has opened up his mind to now, and I don't have the vocabulary around this, is to purchasing a number of records that are on play consistently of various orchestras from around the world. The Berlin Orchestra has the best rendition of this, and the piano in this is this. And so then we had a friend visit who plays the piano, and they had all this stuff to talk about the piano and about just that little bit of knowledge, and just that little bit of stepping outside of his comfort zone gave him a road to be able to making a new friend and having a conversation about something different. And also, again, the areas that he does excel in, great, but also being comfortable in the areas that you don't necessarily excel in can take you down a path towards a really an interesting avenue that you might not have before considered.
Yeah, and he's, Roan was doing this, I suspect, years before we ever started working together. He's just got that natural hardwired ability to cross-pollinate different disciplines. He doesn't express an interest in majoring or minoring in sciences, but he's crushing it in all of those classes. And
I know, yeah.
Yeah, and we talked about the natural relationship between music and math. And every time I get together with him, I know that you and Steve, particularly Steve, are really into 70s and 80s music. So one day on that shelf, on that magic shelf that always has a different album, there will be Songs in the Key of Life by Stevie Wonder. There'll be a Carole King there. So there's an Elton John there. There's always something there. And Roan asked me about that once, and I said, most of these songs are built in binary form. You learn 3 or 4 chords in the inversions. And he asked me, because we both live in Los Angeles, he said, at some point, would you be willing to come over and watch it, just block out these chords for me? I said, absolutely. He said, I can't make house calls with people or Abu Dhabi or wherever. I said, it would be my pleasure. Because if you learn 3 or 4 or 5 chords, and it's not just learning them so that you can play the piano, it's those natural links. Again, with the idea, and I say this a lot, that we're taught that the shortest distance between 2 points is a line. It's not, it's folding space. And it's not about being perfect. You don't have to get it perfect. And Roan's able to do that. And that leads me to a discussion that I wanted to have with you. Are you okay on time? I just want to check in with you. Are you okay?
Yeah, what time is it?
Awesome. I'm great. Where you got ahead of the curve, and this was just a very wise move. And I know Roan is assiduously working on his SATs right now at a very good time. He's getting ahead of the curve on that. Where you started the college visits.
Yes.
And I wanted to get your hit on how you plan those and the dynamic on those, because very often families wait till later. You did this in the summer preceding his junior year. So I'd like to talk to you about how you went about doing that, what the path was, and what you came away with.
Yes. So I didn't want to be slammed at the end with a ton of places to go. So I just wanted to have what could feel like at the early point, a leisurely drive up the California coast, right? And we hit UC Santa Barbara, which is Steve's and my alma mater. We hit San Luis Obispo, Cal Poly, Stanford, and we asked Dan for recommendations to get a good grouping. Berkeley and San Francisco University, or San Francisco, what was it? San Francisco
University of San Francisco, yeah.
University of San Francisco, yeah. And I mean, it gets overwhelming because there's so many, but this gave us
a couple of others. There were 1 or 2 that Roan just right away. I think he texted me along the way. He's like, this is not my jam. And there were a couple of others that he just loved too. There was a lot of real-time feedback.
There's a lot of real-time feedback, and there's a lot of opinions that I have in my head because I'm thinking from a mom, and I'm thinking from the angle that I think I know him. So I know he's in such a small school now. So sometimes I think a place like UC Santa Barbara, it's absolutely gargantuan. While that might sound exciting, I also can't imagine him having the relationships with the teachers that he has now. And is he someone that should be at a middle-sized school? But these are just all questions and things to float out there. Yeah, Cal Poly was not for him. There was a big banner about the tractor pull contest that was coming. Cal Poly is awesome for what you're into, if you're what you're into, but it just didn't go with him. Great, cute little town though. He was really overwhelmed by Stanford. And he loved UC Berkeley. There was a lot of creative thinking around all of this. To use Stanford as an example, you hear a lot of things, and we'll see what happens next year. We'll see. Who knows? There's a definite luck and crapshoot element to this, which I know because I am in the entertainment world. There's a numbers thing also, just like how many people apply to a certain place. And there is also, I think, your life path can open up sometimes something that a place that you wanted to go, Dan touched on this earlier, doesn't end up being the place you get into, but then you realize it's much better elsewhere. But what changed our thinking in the college process around Stanford was we realized that you can, if you have a sport that you're talented at, or I don't want to give away this trick, it's not really a trick, but if you're well-rounded, Roan could potentially audition and sing for his Stanford audition, in addition to the SAT, to the testing, to the letters of recommendation, to the after school things, to his grades. We started to see this as a more holistic process, and to use what are the interests and talents that Roan has that make him an individual and not just a rote robot going into this situation. And then you become the most well-rounded. It's not necessarily the best, because you don't want to do a million things well, but you want to be malleable, but you also want to have real interests. Like Roan's really obsessed with writing, and he was really obsessed with Russian literature, and now it's Dante, and then he's doing his workshops, passing that passion on to younger kids. So that's like an area for him. He has this talent for singing. He has all these things that we're looking at, and so it's going to be about how to best portray the portfolio, the person that is Roan, in the best way, by showcasing what's what's unique about him, and also where he can be a team player, right? But then it's also about looking at the school, even if it is a Stanford or a Harvard or a really hard place. Santa Barbara is really hard to get into now. It wasn't as much when we did, but I guess, although I feel like I got a great education. But it's about looking at the school as well and thinking, is this going to be a great place for Roan to actually plant his seed? Is his blossom going to bloom in this soil? That's a metaphor. I like to look at us all as seeds, and these different universities, and I use it with my improv students, these different comedy schools in LA and around the country. They're your soil. You might not bloom at the Groundlings. It might not be your place, but if you go plant your seed and start doing stand-up comedy where it's just you telling jokes, you might turn into the most amazing plant in the world that needed that specific seeds. It's pairing, what does the school have to offer? What do I have to offer the school? What's unique about me? And also, where can I fit into this world? So that's what we were looking for on our college tour. But I was also glad to be able to bring some of those thoughts back to Dan, because again, as a mom, I can go on and on about all this other stuff, but at the heart of it, I am a mom. And so I am worried about things like, will he be eating, and will he have friends, and will he be lonely, and what will his bed be like? Honestly, I worry about all that stuff. I wish I didn't, but I do. You can go to the best school in the world, but if you're around a bunch of cold, awful people on a horrible, rickety bed, that's not going to be a great life experience for you. Briefly, I decided to go to UC Santa Barbara, even though I had opportunities in New York and different things. And I had some stuff going on in my life where I felt like I did need to be closer to home. I grew up in San Diego. Roan doesn't have that. He had more of a stable childhood than I had. So I think it's given him the confidence with which to have some bigger wings. But anyway, I stayed a little closer to home. And initially I wanted to get a Bachelor of Fine Arts in acting. And I went and I got into the program, and they would judge us at the end of every 6 months or 6 weeks. And I was cut. And I was shocked. But what I had to be honest with myself was that I hated it. It was not my style of theater. And I had to learn that. See, I'm someone who's ended up at the Groundlings, we make our stuff up and we make up Shakespearean sonnets. And while we have a reverence for theater, we are not theater people. We poke fun at and satirize the world of theater, if that makes sense. This was very, very theater. And there wasn't a lot of room for me to be my own person, my own seed. My seed was not going to blossom there. So I had to pick another major, and I picked film studies and film theory, which ended up being unbelievably great major, because basically what it was world history, sociology, psychology, science through the world of film, through the history of film, and then learning to write about film theory and philosophy. And I get very pumped up about it, very passionate, very excited. I ended up running one of the student groups, and I met my husband. I met all my closest friends. I met like everybody who ended up giving me work when I ended up coming to LA. I ended up doing an acting for the camera class there. So that's where my seed really bloomed. However, if you would have spoken to me on the day that I was cut from the Bachelor of Fine Arts, I would have been devastated and my world would have been over. So I tend to look at life and this college search a little bit like that. You do have to have some self-knowledge around that. I didn't. I just thought theater, BFA, this is what I should do, even though I am just not liking this. I am not enjoying, these aren't my people. For me, yes, the college search is really about him having the space. If he is really into Russian literature, okay, which beats me, I want him to have some kids that he can party with and have fun with, but also talk about that kind of stuff, if that makes sense. So in our college search, we're probably not going to be looking for places that would be seen as weird and where the main activity is surfing. My husband's a surfer, my son's not. So it's like, you can't make your kid be something that they're not. Anyway, yeah, that there's so many just thoughts muddled in there. But I guess with Dan, with you, I keep referring to you in the third person. That's funny.
Okay. I refer to myself in the third person all the time, so why not?
There has to be someone also who can see your child through different eyes than you are. Because if I'm worrying that he's going to be like crying lonely in bed and with no friends in college, there has to be someone who's going to be like, okay, I'm sorry you feel that way, but let's actually focus on finding a place where he's going to thrive.
Sure. You mentioned, and by the way, I want to be clear in this video, we're not excluding, we're going to have another interview with Steve, who's just an awesome dad. What are your thoughts on gatekeepers? Do you feel that moms are the primary gatekeepers, at least at this stage in the process, or the dads? What are your thoughts on that? Because the interview I'm conducting for book 1, in which you'll be included as a chapter, and Roan as well. What are your thoughts on that?
Can you define gatekeeper as what you mean by it?
Yeah, absolutely. You and Steve, when you brought me on, there was quite an interview process with that.
I know.
And that was fine. And although I don't normally, I'm very protective of my clients' anonymity and stuff for reasons that are obvious, but you wanted to dig in, and that was fine. And Steve's from New Orleans, a town that's near and dear to my heart. And so I connected.
It was, my dad my dad was like, what really wanted us to dig in. But the funny thing about this, the best thing about this was, we basically asked Dan, can we talk to some other people who you've done this for? Which is something I recently did not do when I was hiring somebody else for another job. And I should have, because it turned out they had never done it in their life before. And it was a horrible situation.
So they lied. They completely lied.
Yeah, I was there first, whatever it was going to be, but it was terrible. Anyway, the funny thing about this with Dan is, because I'd known Dan he was someone that came to the Groundlings and he had all of this great resume, but who knows, right? And so we talked to 3 different parents, and it was wonderful. It was the best thing ever. They're the nicest people, and they just said exactly what I would have needed to have heard, but didn't know I needed to hear. Yeah, so if that's being a gatekeeper, I guess in a way I have been. I've been the one who, when public school was frightening and there was like a kid saying that they were going to slit Roan's throat with a knife in 2nd grade, I was like, not going to do this anymore. Steve didn't want to keep him there either, but I'm very proactive. We were in the car the next day looking for a new place. Yeah, and I guess mothers can be gatekeepers in the example that I gave before, as far as, no, my kid's not going to go into theater. They're going to play soccer because that's what world that I'm comfortable in. I tend to be a very loose gatekeeper because I want Roan, again, to experience as much as he can. But no, when it comes down to spending one-on-one time with another adult like you, or attending a school, then it's pretty intense question asking. And I think I have a really good sense of what is it? I'm in menopause. What is it when you can think of something? You have good instincts about people.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing the menopause thing, because that's the main focus of it. And I really don't know why it's called menopause versus womenopause, but it's the same thing about men's versus women's. It's just not, it just proves that life is not.
I have to weasel that into every conversation in my life, no matter. Anyway,
Is this
no.
just like you're checking out at Ralph's and they're like, here's your change. And you're like, thanks, I had menopause. So it's
Anyway, no, I'm really good at finding. I don't know. I'm a good gatekeeper as far as like finding the best doctors and the best everything for everything.
Sure.
But I'm open as far as gatekeeping. If my son came home and said he wanted to learn, he wanted to start studying Buddhism or things that I don't know anything about, I would certainly be like, great, give it a try. Unless it was some horrible, violent thing. Anyway, we're getting off base, but gosh, he's going to go where he wants as far as gatekeeping. I have exactly where I want him to go and the distance amount. I have all of that, but I've experienced enough life and experienced enough of my own life to know that life can sometimes take you places that you don't expect and that you're not comfortable with, and they become wonderful and exactly the right path. But I will be leaning on Dan for all of this.
And thank you again for that. One of the examples I wanted to use, because I often think of myself as 90 or 95% in the working directly with my mentees business, but the other remaining 5% or 10% as being in the parental support business. And the example that comes to mind the most is that Roan attended a very specific program at UCLA. Maybe talk very quickly about what the program was that he attended at UCLA this last summer.
Roan attended a program that he had to actually submit quite a lot of materials to be accepted into for screenwriting at UCLA, which was an amazing and rigorous and super interesting program. And he worked with Dan, in narrowing down to that. And I was sad that he was going to be. I was at UCLA, which is very close to my house. I don't know how in depth I got with you in this, or how in depth you want me to get in this.
No, just talk about the acceptance process, and then I want to talk about the dropping off incident. But
let's
talk about his acceptance into the program, which is an incredibly rigorous program. And
it's not only is it rigorous, but you get college credit, which is great.
Right. Which is the point of a lot of these summer programs.
Exactly. So he goes and we're there and we're in line and we get his thing. And then they tell us where his particular dorm is, and we're at the bottom of the dorm. And he's, all right, we're going to say goodbye here. My initial instinct was, I'm coming up. I'm going to see your room. I'm going to see your bed. I'm going to meet your roommates, and I'm going to meet the roommates' parents so that I can be in touch with them throughout the next month that you're here. And he said, no, this is what we're going to do. And my husband, Steve, who is very much a little more hands off, he was like, all right, if that's really what you want to do. And I was aghast. And I really wanted Steve to say, no, we're insisting that we come up with you. But we didn't. And it was it also crossed my mind that maybe it would have been harder for him to say goodbye if we were up in his room. So whatever it was, we respected him and we said goodbye there. And it was great. We did it.
And the comment I wanted to make was, you called me that evening and said, I was really upset, Dan. What did you think of this? And I was very honored that you did. It didn't feel like a therapy session.
Yeah, I remember this. There have been times when I've wanted, because Dan I'm comfortable with you. So I feel like if something terrible happens, I could potentially call you crying if I had to. I haven't yet, but you're like someone in my sphere of just like a support person in the world. And so I called and I was like, what does this mean? Is this bad on either side? Almost like how should I feel? How should I take this? And what did you say in that moment?
I said, let me, on the next check-in I have with Roan, see what he has to say about it. It's not, I said, I wouldn't be surprised at all. That was that is. And in fact, that's really what I expected. And I also understand why you feel this way. But this is probably, more often than not, this is what happens with kids when they go to college. The parents start to college and they're like, I can't wait after the inevitable pilgrimage to IKEA to furnish the room. The parents come up and meet everybody, and the kids are like, thanks. Head on back to LA from Philadelphia or wherever it's going to be. And the parents are like, wow, oh my God, what? But when I asked Roan about it, without betraying his confidence, he was like, that's just what I wanted to do. I realized Mom and Dad wanted to come up. It was just what I needed to do. I want to talk about something very important, which is the workshop that Roan put together, with the idea that he has this constellation of interest, but that cluster. He's very interested in literature. He's very interested in acting. He's very interested in music, but these all cluster very tightly. And he talked before about this incredible series of projects he's doing at school, interviewing teachers. But there's the workshop where you pull together something you're just nuts about. And in Roan's case, he gave the proceeds back to the school, which is a very generous thing to do in order to prove the validity of the model so that he could then go ahead and use the school as a springboard for getting more mentees. Talk to me a little bit about his discomfort as he faced it and how it all panned out, and your beaming with pride after his first. And it was talk about what the project was. It was a poetry workshop. But can you unpack it?
Yes. So Roan has a company, or whatever you want to call it,
Called Roan Writes.
Roan Writes program. And he was really into poetry, and he came up with you, but that he was going to run this workshop, and the students were going to learn a limerick, a haiku, and then one that I have never heard of.
A heroic couplet.
Okay, great. And he was excited about it, but he was questioning his ability. I think the whole time he was like, but can I really do this? And both Dan and I were encouraging him, but until you really do it, you don't know that you can do it. And you have to actually be there with that student. He was worried. There was stress about the syllabus and about how he was going to fill the time. And I think just about the whole thing, it was really thrusting him into a situation. It was almost like being thrust into an improv on stage, because once the kid was dropped off, or once you're in front of those students or the workshop attendees, you're on, and you've made this flyer, and it claims that you're going to have fun, and they're going to come away with 3 different kinds of poems. And oh my gosh, how am I going to do that? And is that really going to happen? And I teach workshops in improv, so I tried to sit down with him. I tried to encourage him, but this was something he had to figure out and work out himself, and with Dan. And they made a great flyer, and Roan was like, I got to deliver on it. It says all these things. And he did it. And he was just, he was just absolutely thrilled when he was done, because he realized, they say that one of the best ways to judge how well you know something is if you can teach it. So no, he is not a poetry professor, but he could teach what he knew about these 3 kinds of poetry, which was obviously more than I didn't even know what one of them was. And he taught it from an angle of being excited and fun and happy. He's just the kind of person, like, he just loves haikus and he loves rhyming. So he'll just do it for fun. He'll do stuff like that. And if you're having fun and you want to share your passion for something, it did rub off on the students. And I think it was a really big sense of, it was a growth opportunity. I think he felt more mature after he handled it. He was in charge, and it worked, and it went well. And that was really big. And I can just see the way he walks differently now. Like, he knows he can handle a situation. He's
Downtown LA emergency thing. Okay. You have to rewind a little bit too. He walks.
when your kid's in high school, you don't go to school with them, but I had to drop something off the other day. So I went, and it was really sweet. Like, he was giving high five to some of the middle school students, and it was sweet. I was like, my kid's one of those kids that the middle school students, they think he's cool, but they also feel safe with him. Like, he's a nice one. Because I remember that. You'd look up to these people, and sometimes they were not nice. And that, to me, gosh, that's for life. That is for life. If you can share and teach and lead something that you are passionate about in a way that others who are learning from you look up to you, but also feel safe with you and feel the humanness with you. That's what I want when I run my workshops. I want to be able to impart my wisdom on things, but also be a human. And Roan now is going to carry, and as he continues to do this, he'll carry knowing that he has the ability to see something through from start to finish. And there was no calling your parent in or calling Dan in to help you finish the workshop. You had to do it. And I remember that myself. When I taught my very first groundlings class, this was like over 20 years ago, but it was really scary. It was really scary because they're adults and they're here and they've paid money. And I remember another teacher telling me, don't let on that this is the first time you're teaching. Don't keep saying, oh, I've never done this before, because I guess I was doing that. Anyway, Roan got this lesson a lot earlier than I did. So it was cool.
Yeah, and it was, again, I provided him with a template in Canva,
Yeah.
which he changed to fit his own thing. And we used your social media account just to rope in from I believe one of the kids who was in it was a I don't want to say townsperson, but one of the background members, an 8th grade member, Roan was a junior, again, with the lead in Greece.
Yeah.
And just there was that 8th graders looking up to an incoming, a rising junior with that sense of, wow, like you're old and wise. But
Yeah.
there was a two-way thing going on, and I remember it was a multi-day event. I think it was a 2 or 3 day event. And they
Yeah.
were telling me, not in panic, but in wonder after the first day, and saying, "Dan, we actually got all the poems done the first day. What do we do the
Yes.
second day?"
Yeah.
And I told them, just lean into that unknown, lean into that beautiful,
Yes.
terror of not knowing, and see what comes of it. You might even have him teach a section, but just lean into it. I think
And
this great photo, maybe we'll even insert it in this video, and I talked to you about it yesterday, of this young man holding the Roan Rights, because we came up with roanrights.com,
yeah.
holding the Roan Rights graduation certificate with beaming with pride, and there's Roan,
Yeah.
arms crossed, and just that sense of pride. And again, like he left with the result. It's really the transformation. It's not like your kid's going to learn poetry. Your kid's going to walk away with
Yeah.
3 poems and a bag and an actual certificate. So they're paying for the experience of being with him. And one of the things, and Roan brought this up, not me, and we talked about this before, this could be a legacy that Roan leaves behind. This could get
Yeah.
passed to this young, rising 9th grader, who could then in turn pass it over. And so when Roan comes back, the returning hero in the hero's journey, in his first year of college,
Yeah.
this is a legacy project. More importantly, he donated the proceeds back to the theater department at your very small school.
Yes. And one of the things they ended up talking about on that second day was just like some life skills of like 8th grade and high school skills and just more of that kind of mentoring. And I loved that because this particular kid's really sweet and cute. So,
Yeah. And again, Roan's done this magical thing, which I try to impart to my mentees. It doesn't always stick the first time, which is that you're doing these things not so that it will look good. And this comes back to your point about sticking out. It used to be well-rounded, then they talked about the spike, but just being different in a way that is genuine and authentic to you.
yeah.
He's doing this in such a way, not so that he looks great on the college application, but makes him stand out in an unforgettable way. And that just comes from his heart and who he is.
Yeah.
Was that what you were trying to say before?
100%. I think one of the hardest things to show potentially on a college application, which we are attempting to show, is somebody who is just in it is passionate about what he's doing and wants to share it and is a learner and a leader and has something to offer.
Yeah.
But it does come from the heart. And you have to hope that, and that's why, and you come from the heart also.
It goes without saying, I'm so grateful, and I've said this before, to have the opportunity to work with you and Roan.
He's never going to have any opportunities and has had very little education.
He's not going to get into Stanford, insert other name here, and cost you 6 figures. But what would be your advice? And I appreciate the kind words you've said about me, and it goes both directions. To a mom or dad or a mentee who is at that, freshman or sophomore year, and they're stuck wondering, what do I do right now? What would be perhaps the 3 pieces of advice you would offer them based on the journey that you went through when you were thinking about engaging somebody to serve as a mentor? Because I think your dad is a
child
and
psychiatrist.
he interviewed me along the process.
I know.
Yeah.
He went to Yale and then UCLA Medical School, and he interviews kids for Yale, which is crazy.
What a slacker! What a slacker he is!
Yeah.
And all of you are just so beautifully educated. Your husband, who's just awesome, is a surfer and a professional chef, and I mean, we get along so well. In the next interview, we'll do this together.
Yeah.
What would be your best advice based on what you've seen so far towards moms and dads and mentees who are struggling with that, with the idea that kids grow away from their parents, and that's a healthy thing, and there's a process of healthy differentiation. What would be your best kind of hits for them as they move forward with that idea that it's a thorny hedge maze?
I would say you could start by writing down what your hopes are and what your fears are, and start circling in on what is the goal here. We knew for Roan that he really wants to go to college and he wants to go to a place where he can thrive and that really has a lot to offer him, right? So then you need to have enough wisdom to say, I don't know about all of that. And I can read every book that I want to, but wow, the stuff online is starting to spin me. So maybe there's somebody who actually knows about this who can guide us. And then you magically find that person like we did. But in looking for that person, you have to make sure that you gel and that you can converse and that you're on the same wavelength. And then you can call their references. But I would say it's a mix of letting go enough to know what you don't know, and then being smart enough to reach out to the right people to help you with that. Don't just fall for the first, salesperson. And then also to approach it as an exciting adventure and journey with, it does sound corny, I know, but I'm a storyteller, with unexpected excitement and surprises and things along the way. You don't know what's going to happen. So you don't know. So know what you don't know and be excited that some of the stuff you don't know is going to be really great. And be open to being taught, be open to asking questions, and be open to the whole process, and trust. Those are all also improv things. You got to be open on stage. You don't know what it's going to be about. I don't know what this scene's going to be about. Maybe it's going to be great, and I trust my partner.
Yeah, and then improv is baked into the communication sort of pillar. Like there's the entrepreneurship piece, which Roan has learned, and the workshop contains improvisation, mentorship, and communications, right? It's the mentor, market, and I have this all the time. Market, mentor, and monetize model. And he runs down that in such a beautiful way, and will continue to do this. And I have the privilege, since it's not baked into my program, of working with him in his first year of school, and hopefully bringing him on as a mentor and pay him well with working with incoming 8th and 9th graders. It's been such an extraordinary journey, and it's far from over, and it will continue. Very often I have mentors who a decade ago, some cases longer than that, who call me up and they're like, hey, this just happened. And I don't know who's more thrilled, they or me. And you've met Kelly, you've met my beautiful wife, and very often I'll come from out of sessions with Roan, and I've said this before, but I'll say it here again, where she'll say, who's paying who? Who had more fun, Roan or you? And I don't know the answer to that. And that's part of it. So I'm so grateful for your time. I know how busy you are right now. More will unfold. And would you be willing to sit down for another interview? I know you're coming up.
Of course.
More is going to unfold. We'll have another story on this one. You and Roan have very generously agreed to be chapters in the upcoming book, part 1. And the first author signing is going to take place very soon.
Oh my gosh.
70,000 person event, which I've been asked to keynote, but it's going to be, it's so wonderful. And we have temporarily put a pause on the vegetable of the week, but Ron's out there pumping iron every week. So,
and eating totally differently than he was. So it's like a different world.
Yeah, but not in a crazy kind of way. And just getting that text at midnight last night saying, Dan, I'm having a sleepover.
Oh my God, it was at midnight.
No, it was okay. I mean, which is fine. I keep crazy vampires all over the world saying, Dan, what's the scariest movie you ever watched? And I went back to the 1976, or it was 75, I think it was 76, The Omen with the great and Lee Remick. And he just wrote back, he's, I'm on it. It's so great. Hey, thanks so much. I'm very grateful for your time.
Thank you.
Godspeed, and we'll catch up again soon. Okay?
Absolutely. Happy.
Okay. We'll talk soon. Happy holidays.
Okay. Bye.